I don't even know how to start this, but I'll just say it. I cheated on my husband. It wasn't planned, and I wish I could tell you it was meaningless, but the way my hand shook as I told him should tell you everything. I could barely look at him that night, the silence around us louder than any fight we'd ever had. I still remember how he just sat there, arms resting on his knees, head tilted slightly, as if he was studying me like I was some puzzle he was too tired to solve. I thought he would scream, break something, leave, but he didn't. He just breathed out, slow, controlled, and said, "Tell me everything." I thought he meant just the basics. A name, when it happened, why it happened. But when I tried to give him the clean surface-level version, he shook his head. "No," he said so calmly it scared me. "Tell me everything, exactly how it happened. Word for word. I need to hear it." I felt something collapse inside me, something that wasn't ready to let go of the lie that I could just confess, cry, and we'd somehow move on. I could feel his eyes on me, heavy, steady, like a weight I couldn't shrug off. And the worst part? A small part of me wanted to tell him, to relive it, to feel something again, even if it was guilt or shame, just to know I was still alive. So I took a breath, and the room felt smaller, the air thicker, as I said, "It started the night you went to your brother's." And his hand moved. I thought he was going to reach for me, or for the glass of water on the table, but he pulled out his phone instead, thumb pressing the screen. "What are you doing?" I whispered, but my voice sounded far away, like it wasn't even mine. He didn't look at me. "Just keep talking," he said, and I saw the red light blinking on his phone. He was recording everything. I don't think I've ever felt so exposed in my life. That little red light on his phone felt like it was pulsing in time with my heartbeat, and my palms were sweating, sticking to the sides of my leggings as I tried to steady myself. He leaned back, eyes on me, waiting like this was some test I had to pass, like he needed every word. I opened my mouth, but the first thing that came out was a whisper. "Please don't do this." But he didn't even blink. He just said, "Talk." So I did. I told him how it was raining that night, how I'd felt so restless sitting alone in our living room, how the storm outside felt like it was crawling under my skin. I told him I went out to clear my head, and I ended up meeting him, someone I knew from work, someone who had always looked at me a little too long, who made me feel seen in a way that was dangerous. As I spoke, my voice would catch, my throat tightening whenever I tried to skip over the parts that still made my skin flush when I remembered them. He wouldn't let me. Every time I tried to rush, he would say, "No, slower," like he wanted to feel it with me, or maybe punish himself by hearing exactly how it happened. And I could see him clenching his jaw, the muscle there twitching every time I mentioned a touch, a glance, a breath that shouldn't have happened. I could feel my own body remembering too. The way the air had felt in that car, warm and heavy. The way a single look had made me forget everything I had promised to protect. My breath was shaky as I spoke, and the room felt hot, like the air was pressing down on me. I could see his eyes darken, but he didn't look away, not even once, and I hated how that made me feel. Seen, but not in the way I wanted. Exposed, but unable to stop. At one point, I wiped a tear off my cheek, my voice cracking as I told him how I had let this man's hand brush against mine. How that small touch felt like the spark that lit everything I'd been holding back for so long. I hated how part of me felt alive telling him, even as I was breaking in front of him. And that was when I noticed it. He wasn't just holding the phone to record. His thumb was tracing over the screen slowly, like he was marking the moments, like he planned to replay them later. I stopped speaking, swallowing hard, looking at him. But he just looked back, the corners of his mouth tightening, eyes unreadable. "Don't stop now," he said, his voice low, controlled. And so I took another breath, the air catching in my throat, and I kept going. It was the way his eyes stayed on me that made it worse. I could feel my pulse in my neck, in my wrists, in places I didn't want to admit, as I spoke about the way it felt when the other man leaned in, the way his breath touched the side of my face when he whispered my name. I told him how I should have pulled away, how everything inside me was screaming to remember who I was, who I belonged to. But I didn't. I told him how my skin felt hot, how every inch of me was on edge as I felt that gaze sliding over me in the dim light of that car. Headlights from passing cars flashing shadows across the dashboard while I sat there trembling. And I could see it in my husband's eyes, the way he was clenching his hand around the phone, the way his jaw tensed, the way his breathing changed slower but deeper, like he was fighting something inside. "You liked it," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. I could only nod, the shame burning so deep in my chest I thought it would choke me. I told him how it felt when the other man's hand brushed against my thigh. So light I could barely feel it, but somehow it felt like it was everywhere. How I had closed my eyes for just a moment, telling myself I would stop it, that I would say no. But when I opened my eyes I was leaning in too. I paused, breath shaky, eyes flicking to the blinking red light, and I hated how my lips trembled as I remembered. The memory wasn't gone, not even close. It was in my body, in the way my skin tightened just from the memory of a breath, a glance, a silent plea that should never have been answered. My husband didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared. And I could see that something was breaking behind his eyes, something I couldn't name. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears catching in the back of my throat, making my voice raw. "Keep going," he said, his voice low, even, but I could see the way his fingers were white around the edges of the phone. And so I did. I told him how the windows fogged up, how the world outside felt so far away as I let myself get lost in a moment that wasn't mine to take. I told him how I felt alive, wanted, terrified, like every nerve in my body was reaching for something I didn't even understand. And the worst part was that as I spoke, I felt it all again. The ache, the heat, the trembling, and the guilt that followed every breath. I wiped my eyes and for a moment I looked at him, hoping he would stop me, that he would put the phone down, pull me into his arms or yell or do anything to make it stop. But he just nodded, eyes cold, and said, "Don't leave anything out." I think I forgot how to breathe when I saw the way he was looking at me. His eyes were dark, unblinking, and I could see the way his chest rose and fell, slow but heavy, like each breath was a choice. The blinking red light on his phone was the only thing that moved between us, a silent witness to every word I couldn't take back. I told him how it felt when the other man's hand finally found mine. How it wasn't a grab, just a warm, steady touch, like an invitation I didn't know how to refuse. How my skin felt too tight for my body, how everything else disappeared, leaving just the heat of that touch and the sound of rain tapping against the windshield. And I told him the truth, I didn't pull away. My husband closed his eyes for a moment, just one, but it was enough for me to see that I was cutting him open with every word. I wanted to stop, to swallow the memory down and pretend it never happened, but he kept the phone pointed at me, silent, waiting. So I told him how my breath caught when the other man leaned closer, how I felt the warmth of him before I even felt the touch, how I could smell the rain on his skin, the faint cologne that wasn't yours, wasn't home, but somehow felt like danger and comfort all at once. I told him how I could feel the other man's breath near my neck, how it made me shiver even though the car was warm, how a single touch on my jaw made me close my eyes, just for a second, but it was enough for me to forget everything else. And I hated myself for how I remembered it, how my body remembered it. The way my heart pounded so hard I thought it would break through my ribs, the way my lips parted without thinking, the way the world fell away in that moment I wish I could erase. My voice broke when I told him that was the moment I knew I had crossed the line, that there was no going back, no matter how much I wished I could. I wrapped my arms around myself as I spoke, trying to hold myself together as I saw the way his eyes glistened, even if he tried to hide it by looking away for a moment. The light from the kitchen spilled across his face, catching the wetness in his eyes, before he blinked it away and turned back to me. "Don't stop," he said, but his voice was softer this time, like he was already somewhere far away, but he needed to hear the rest before he could let himself leave. And I wanted to stop, God, I wanted to stop. But I didn't. Because he was still there, still recording, and the worst part was that I wanted him to know. All of it. Even if it shattered everything. So I took another breath, letting it tremble out of me, and kept going. The words stuck in my throat when I reached that part. I could feel the way the air changed in the room, heavy, pressing against my skin, as if the memory itself was alive and watching me confess. My husband's eyes were locked on mine, the phone steady in his hand, the red light blinking like a slow, cruel heartbeat. I let him kiss me, I finally whispered, and it felt like I was tearing something open inside me just saying it out loud. His jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded once, slow, telling me to keep going. I told him how it wasn't just a kiss, not really. It was the way the other man looked at me right before, the way his eyes searched mine like he was asking me if I needed to feel wanted, needed to feel alive, needed to forget everything for just a moment. How I let my eyes fall closed because I couldn't look at him, or at myself, and how the space between us disappeared so slowly it felt like a wave I couldn't stop. I told him how my breath caught, how I felt his hand at the back of my neck, warm, grounding, dangerous, how I felt my body lean in before I even realized I had moved. How the kiss itself was soft at first, hesitant, like we both knew it was wrong but neither of us wanted to stop. And how it deepened, how my fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer because I couldn't stand the space between us, how everything outside that car, the rain, the lights, the world, just fell away. My voice was shaking as I spoke, the words coming out like a confession I was choking on, but the memory made my skin heat, made my heart pound, made me hate myself and want to hide, all at once. I told him how I felt it in every part of me, how the warmth of that moment crawled under my skin and settled there, how I felt like I was falling, and for a moment I wanted to keep falling. And I told him how, right after, I pulled back, breathless, shaking, the fog on the windows trembling from the way we were breathing, and how I whispered, "This can't happen," even though it already had. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself as I told him, unable to look at him, tears slipping down my cheeks, falling onto my shirt. I could hear my breath, shaky, raw, in the silence between us, and the only other sound was the quiet buzz of the phone recording every word, every sob, every ragged breath. I looked up, finally, expecting him to be angry, to stand up and leave, to yell, to break, to do anything. But he just stared at me, eyes dark, face unreadable, the phone still steady in his hand. "Did you want more?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, but I could hear the break hiding underneath. And I couldn't answer, because the truth was written all over my face. I don't know how long we sat there in that silence, the weight of everything I'd said pressing into the room until it was hard to breathe. His question, "Did you want more?" kept echoing in my head, like it was bouncing off the walls, sinking into my skin. And the worst part was that he already knew the answer. The way my eyes dropped, the way my breath caught, the way I couldn't force a single word past my lips, all of it told him the truth I couldn't say out loud. I could feel my heartbeat everywhere, a hot, unsteady drum in my chest as I wiped tears from my face with shaking hands. The room was warm, but I felt cold, like I was standing in the rain again, lost in that moment I should have run from. He finally set the phone down on the coffee table, the red light still blinking, recording everything. I watched it like it was alive, like it was going to speak for me, confess everything I couldn't. And then he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his face so close I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way it flickered with something else, something sharp, something I didn't understand. "Tell me," he said softly, "what it felt like." I shook my head, fresh tears spilling down, but he reached out, fingers brushing my chin, lifting my face so I had to look at him. His touch was warm, steady, and it made my chest ache because it was still familiar. Still him, and I didn't deserve that softness. "Please," he whispered, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't a plea. It was a demand. A need. So I told him. I told him how it felt when the other man's lips pressed against mine, the way it was slow at first, like a question, a test, a promise I knew I wasn't allowed to accept. How the heat built so quickly, how my breath caught, how my hands moved on their own, pulling him closer, needing to feel wanted, needed. How the kiss made me feel like I was floating, like everything I had been holding back for months came pouring out in that single, stolen moment. How I felt alive and terrified, how my skin tingled, how every part of me felt too sensitive, too awake, like a single touch could unravel me. How I hated myself for loving that feeling. I could see my husband's eyes flicker as I spoke, the hurt tightening around the edges, but he didn't pull away. His thumb brushed a tear from my cheek, slow, careful, like he was memorizing the way I felt under his hand. And then he said something I didn't expect. "Show me." My breath caught, my eyes widening because I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. But he leaned closer, so close I could feel his breath on my lips, warm, unsteady, carrying the scent of coffee and something that felt like home. His eyes didn't leave mine, and I saw the way they softened just for a moment. "Show me how you kissed him," he whispered, and I felt the world tilt under me. The phone was still recording. And for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing, the warmth of his hand on my jaw, the tears on my skin, and the space between us, small, charged, trembling. Waiting. I wish I could tell you I pulled away. That I told him no, that I told him this wasn't the way to heal, that we couldn't fix the shattered pieces of us with something so twisted. But I didn't. I felt the warmth of his hand on my face, the weight of his eyes on mine, the breath between us, trembling, heavy, and I felt myself lean in. Just a fraction. Just enough for him to close the space. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't soft and it wasn't angry either. It was something else, a storm wrapped in quiet, a question wrapped in hurt, a need wrapped in betrayal. And when he kissed me, I kissed him back. It wasn't gentle. It was slow, but there was a desperation under it, something unspoken but heavy, something that made my fingers clutch at his shirt, pulling him closer, needing the comfort and hating that I needed it. His hand slid to the back of my neck, grounding me, anchoring me, but there was tension in his hold, like he was trying to memorize the way I felt, the way I tasted, the way I trembled against him. I could taste the salt of my tears between us, feel the way my breath shuddered as his lips moved with mine, taking, giving, demanding, testing. And for a moment I felt it all over again, the heat, the ache, the way every part of me came alive with that touch. But this time it was him. My husband. The man I betrayed. The man who is still recording. When I pulled back, my breath was ragged, tears still sliding down, and his forehead rested against mine. I could feel his chest heaving, his fingers tightening against the back of my neck before letting go, leaving a ghost of warmth that made me want to lean in again. Now I know, he whispered, voice rough, breaking. Now I know exactly what you gave him. And then he picked up the phone, the blinking red light the only sound in the room, louder than our breathing, louder than the pounding in my chest. I watched as he ended the recording, his thumb hovering over the screen, eyes locked on mine with a sadness I've never seen before. Was this your forgiveness? I asked, my voice small, breaking. He looked at me, silent for a long moment, before his lips parted, his voice low. No, he said. This was my goodbye. And then he stood up, the recording in his hand, the proof of everything we were and everything I ruined, and walked out the door without looking back.